The ancient scroll crackled like dying leaves as Lyra's trembling fingers traced the faded bloodline sigil, a silver wolf crowned with thorns, its eyes blazing with prophetic fire. The attic air grew thick with centuries of secrets as the marking on her wrist began to burn, matching the symbol perfectly. Below, in the shadowed streets of Salem's Hollow, an alpha's howl split the night, not of mourning, but of recognition. The last daughter of House Silvermoon has awakened. Cale Blackthorn felt the ancient pull in his very bones, the sacred oath his bloodline had sworn echoing through his soul. For 300 years, his family had guarded the secret, waiting for this moment when destiny would demand its due. The prophecy was clear. When the lost heir claimed her birthright, the werewolf dynasties would either rise to glory or fall to eternal darkness. Some legacies sleep for centuries, waiting for love to awaken them. Chapter 1. The mirror in Lyra Chen's grandmother's attic had been covered with black cloth for as long as she could remember, but tonight, something called to her from beneath its shroud. The autumn wind rattled the old Victorian's bones as she climbed the narrow stairs, a box of her grandmother's belongings clutched against her chest. 3 days had passed since the funeral, 3 days since the last person who'd known her family's true history had taken those secrets to the grave. Or so Lyra had thought. The floorboards groaned under her feet as she set the box down and pulled the dusty cloth away from the mirror. Her reflection stared back, unremarkable brown eyes, straight black hair, the kind of face that blended into crowds. Nothing special. Nothing that suggested she was anything more than a 25-year-old librarian who'd inherited a house full of mysteries and a bank account full of debt. But as she opened the ornate wooden box, everything changed. The first item was a leather journal bound with silver wire, its pages yellow with age. The second was a necklace bearing a pendant she'd never seen before, a wolf crowned with thorns, its silver surface etched with symbols that seemed to shift in the candlelight. The third item made her breath catch, a scroll sealed with red wax, the seal bearing the same wolf symbol. Her hands shook as she broke the wax. The parchment unrolled with a whisper, revealing text written in multiple languages, some she recognized, others that seemed to dance before her eyes like living things. But at the center, drawn in what looked suspiciously like dried blood, was a family tree that made her heart stop. House Silvermoon was written at the top in elegant script, branches flowing down through generations of names she'd never heard. At the bottom, in fresh ink that couldn't have been more than a few days old, was her own name, Lyra Chen, last heir of the Silver Crown. "That's impossible," she whispered to the empty attic. Her grandmother had been Eleanor Chen, a quiet woman who'd run a small herbal shop and told stories about old folklore. There had been no mention of royalty, no hint of anything beyond the ordinary. As if responding to her denial, the pendant around her neck began to warm against her skin. She looked down to find it glowing with soft silver light, and that's when she saw it, the mark on her wrist that had never been there before. The same crowned wolf, appearing on her skin as if drawn by an invisible hand, burning with cold fire. The mirror behind her began to shimmer. Lyra spun around to find the glass surface rippling like water, and through it, she could see not her reflection but a vast throne room carved from living moonstone. Banners bearing the crowned wolf hung from soaring pillars, and on the throne sat a woman who looked exactly like Lyra, but older, regal, wearing a crown of silver thorns. "My daughter's daughter's daughter," the woman said, her voice echoing from centuries past. "The bloodline awakens at last. This isn't real." Lyra backed away from the mirror, but the woman's eyes followed her movement. The Silvermoon dynasty ruled the werewolf kingdoms for 1,000 years before the great betrayal scattered us to the winds. "You are the last of our line, Lyra, and the prophecy speaks true. Only through you can our people's glory be restored." The mirror shimmered again, showing flashes of images, great wolves running through moonlit forests, castle walls rising from mountain peaks, armies of shifters bowing before silver thrones. Then darkness, fire, screams of the dying as kingdoms fell. "House Blackthorn betrayed us," the ancestral spirit continued, her voice heavy with old pain. "But the prophecy binds us still. Their heir and ours, united in love or locked in battle, will determine the fate of all our kind. A howl split the night outside, long and mournful, and Lyra felt it in her very soul. The mark on her wrist flared brighter, and suddenly she could feel him, a presence in the darkness, ancient and powerful, searching for her. The front door of the house exploded inward. Heavy footsteps echoed up the stairs as Lyra frantically tried to roll up the scroll, to hide the evidence of whatever impossible thing was happening to her. But the footsteps were too fast, too purposeful, and before she could even reach for the cloth to cover the mirror, he was there. 6.5 feet of pure masculine power filled the doorway, his broad shoulders blocking out the light from the hallway. Dark hair fell across a face that could have been carved by ancient gods, all sharp angles and predatory beauty. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch, gold shot through with silver, the eyes of a wolf in human form. "Lady Silvermoon," he said, and his voice was like whiskey and smoke, carrying the weight of centuries. "I am Cale Blackthorn, sworn guardian of your bloodline secrets. I've been waiting for you to awaken." Blackthorn? The name fell from her lips like a curse. "But you, your family, betrayed yours, yes." His expression was carved from granite, giving nothing away. 300 years ago, my ancestor made a choice that destroyed the dynasty. But the blood oath remains. My family is bound to serve and protect the Silver Moon heir until the prophecy is fulfilled. He stepped into the attic, and Lyra felt the air crackle with power. This man was dangerous in ways she couldn't begin to understand, predator and protector all at once. "What prophecy?" she asked, though part of her already knew she didn't want to hear the answer. Cale's eyes flicked to the mark on her wrist, and she saw something flash across his face, surprise, recognition, and something that might have been fear. "When Silver Moon meets Raven Night, and ancient bloodlines merge in love or fight," he recited, his voice taking on the cadence of ritual, "the dynasty shall rise from ash and bone, or fall forever, lost and lone. The choice is yours, last daughter born, to trust the son of those who've worn the crown of thorns upon their brow, or let the bloodline die here now." The mirror behind them flared with sudden light, and Lyra's ancestral spirit spoke once more. "The die is cast, child of my blood. Blackthorn stands before you as prophecy demands. But beware, love and hate are but two faces of the same coin, and destiny cares nothing for the hearts it breaks in service to its will." The light faded, leaving them alone in the candlelit attic. Cale extended his hand to her, and Lyra could see the mark on his own wrist, a raven crowned with thorns, dark mirror to her own silver wolf. "Come with me, Lyra," he said, and there was something almost vulnerable in those golden eyes. "Let me show you what you truly are. Let me show you the world you were born to rule." Outside, more howls echoed through the night. Not mournful now, but urgent. Calling. Lyra looked at the scroll in her hands, at the impossible family tree that rewrote everything she'd thought she knew about herself. She looked at the man before her, enemy and guardian, the living embodiment of her family's greatest betrayal and only hope. The mark on her wrist pulsed with silver fire, and deep in her bones, she felt something stirring, power that had been sleeping, waiting for this moment to wake. She took his hand. The moment their skin touched, the world exploded into light and sensation. Images flooded her mind, running through moonlit forests on four legs, the taste of wild freedom on her tongue, castle halls where werewolf lords debated policy while their ladies held court in gardens that bloomed under starlight, the feel of wind beneath her wings. No, not wings, but the memory of her grandmother's grandmother, who had ruled the skywolves of the northern peaks. And through it all, threading like a golden chain through the visions, was him. Cale in a dozen different forms across the centuries. Not him exactly, but his bloodline, his ancestors. Standing guard at Silvermoon gates. Fighting beside her family's warriors. And in one flash of memory that made her gasp, kneeling before a silver throne as a Silvermoon queen placed a circlet of black iron on his brow, naming him protector and champion. Before the betrayal. Before the fall. "What did you see?" he asked, his voice rough as he released her hand. Everything, she whispered. I saw everything. The howls were getting closer now, and Kale's head snapped toward the window. We need to go, he said urgently. The other houses have felt the awakening. Some will come as allies, but others. His jaw tightened. Others remember the old grudges and the power that was lost when your bloodline fell. They'll want to ensure it stays fallen. As if summoned by his words, something crashed through the attic window in a shower of glass and moonlight. A man landed in a crouch, but even as Lyra watched, his form began to shift and change, bones elongating, muscles reshaping, until a massive gray wolf stood where the intruder had been. Its eyes were fixed on her, and she could read the intent there as clearly as printed words. Kill the heir. End the bloodline. Keep the old power buried. Kale moved faster than humanly possible, placing himself between Lyra and the threat. His own transformation was fluid as water, terrifyingly beautiful. Man becoming wolf in the space of a heartbeat, midnight black fur rippling with muscle and ancient strength. The two wolves circled each other in the small attic space, growls rumbling like thunder. But Lyra found she wasn't afraid. The power in her blood was singing now, responding to the danger, and she could feel her own beast stirring, not wolf, but something else. Something that had slept for 3 centuries, waiting. Let me out, whispered a voice that was her own but older, stronger. Let me show them what happens when they threaten the silver crown. The mark on her wrist blazed like a star, and Lyra surrendered to the power calling her home. The last thing she heard before the change took her was Kale's mental voice, impossibly clear in her mind. Welcome to your true life, my lady. Try not to let the destiny kill us both. Then silver fire consumed her vision, and Lady Lyra Silvermoon, last heir of the werewolf dynasties, finally came into her birthright. Chapter 2. The transformation was nothing like the movies, no screaming agony, no bones cracking and reforming. Instead, it felt like coming home after a lifetime of exile. Silver light poured from Lyra's skin as her human form dissolved, but what emerged wasn't the wolf she'd expected. She was something far more ancient. Wings of liquid moonlight spread from her shoulders as her body elongated into something between wolf and dragon, covered in scales that shifted from silver to pearl white. Her claws gleamed like polished steel, and when she opened her muzzle to roar, the sound shattered every mirror in the house. Skywolf, Kale's mental voice reached her, full of awe and something close to reverence. The legends were true. House Silvermoon didn't just rule the earthbound packs, they commanded the heavens themselves. The gray wolf that had burst through the window cowered before her, whimpering as ancient instincts screamed at him to submit to his superior. But Lyra's enhanced senses caught the scent of others approaching, dozens of them, surrounding the house like a pack of hunters. We need to leave.
Now.
Kale's midnight form moved to the shattered window, his golden eyes scanning the darkness below.
Can you fly?
Lyra flexed her wings experimentally and felt the air currents respond to her will. Knowledge flowed through her bloodline like water finding its course. Flight patterns used by her ancestors, aerial combat techniques, the ancient sky roads that connected the werewolf kingdoms across continents. I was born to fly, she replied, her mental voice carrying harmonics that spoke of wind and storm and endless sky. But where do we go? Home, Kale said simply. To the Moonspire, the last stronghold of House Silvermoon. Below them, the gray wolf had shifted back to human form, a lean man with cruel eyes and ritual scars covering his arms. You cannot run forever, false queen, he snarled up at them. House Grimfong remembers the old slights. We will not bow to Silvermoon tyranny again. Lyra felt a surge of anger that surprised her with its intensity. This man spoke of tyranny, but the memories flowing through her bloodline told a different story, of House Grimfang's raids on peaceful villages, their practice of hunting humans for sport, the way they'd sold their loyalty to the highest bidder when the great betrayal began. Later, Kale warned, sensing her rage. Save your fury, for when we have the high ground. She spread her wings and leaped from the window, Kale beside her in his wolf form. But as they fell, his shape began to change again. Wings of shadow and starlight unfurled from his back, and suddenly he was flying beside her, his raven-black coat gleaming with hints of midnight blue. "Another skywolf?" Lyra asked in amazement. "House Blackthorn were your family's sworn aerial cavalry before the betrayal," he explained as they soared over Salem's Hollow. "We lost the ability for 3 centuries, until you awakened. The bloodline bonds are restoring what was broken." Below them, the town spread out like a miniature landscape, but Lyra's enhanced vision could see the threats moving through the shadows. Werewolves in human form stationed at every exit from town, others in wolf shape racing through the forests on either side of the main roads. Someone had planned this ambush carefully. "How many houses are hunting us?" she asked. 3, maybe 4. Grimfong for certain. They never forgave your great-great-grandmother for stripping them of their hunting territories after they broke the compact of human protection. Ironwood will be with them. They've been trying to claim dominion over the eastern packs since the dynasty fell. And he hesitated, banking left to avoid a church steeple.
And?
House Stormcrest. They believed they should have inherited the silver crown when your bloodline was thought extinct. The name stirred more ancestral memories. Political maneuverings in great halls, marriage alliances and broken treaties, the delicate dance of power that had held the werewolf kingdoms together for a millennium. And threaded through it all, the growing corruption that had led to the great betrayal. They flew in silence for several minutes, following what Lyra somehow knew was an ancient flight path used by her ancestors. The landscape below changed from suburban sprawl to deep forest, and the moon above seemed to grow brighter, as if welcoming her home. "Tell me about the betrayal," she said finally. "I need to understand what really happened." Kale's mental voice grew heavy with old shame. 300 years ago, the werewolf kingdoms were fracturing. Some houses wanted to reveal ourselves to humanity, to rule openly as we had in the ancient times. Others wanted to retreat deeper into hiding. Your ancestress, Queen Seraphina Silvermoon, tried to hold the center, maintaining the compact that kept humans safe while preserving our traditional ways. Images flowed between their linked minds, a woman who looked remarkably like Lyra, but taller, more regal, wearing the silver crown of their house. She stood in a great council chamber, surrounded by the representatives of dozens of werewolf houses, her voice raised in passionate argument. She was magnificent, Kale continued. Wise, just beloved by most of her subjects. But there were those who saw her mercy as weakness, including your ancestor, Lord Commander Marcus Blackthorn, yes. The pain in his mental voice was sharp as a blade. He believed the only way to survive in the modern world was through strength, absolute strength. When the radical houses began their rebellion, when they started hunting humans openly and threatening to expose us all, the scene in Lyra's mind shifted, showing the same council chamber, but now it was chaos. Werewolves in partial shift fought each other with claw and fang while banners burned and ancient treaties were torn to shreds. He made a choice, Kale finished quietly. He betrayed his oath, betrayed his queen, and joined the rebellion. Not because he agreed with their goals, but because he thought he could control them from within, end the civil war before it destroyed everything. But it didn't work.
No.
The radicals used his betrayal as proof that even the crown's most loyal supporters had abandoned her. The moderate houses lost faith. And Queen Seraphina, the image in her mind showed the same regal woman, but now she was alone in the throne room, her crown lying shattered on the floor. Blood pooled around her feet, and her silver eyes, so like Lyra's own, were dim with approaching death. She was assassinated 3 days later, Kale said, along with her entire family, or so everyone believed. But someone survived. Her youngest daughter, barely 16, managed to escape during the siege. She fled to the human world, hid her true nature, started a new life. That was your great-great-great-grandmother. Lyra absorbed this, feeling the weight of centuries settling on her shoulders. She was the product of 6 generations of hiding, of women who had lived as humans while carrying the blood of Sky Queens in their veins. And your family? Spent 3 centuries seeking redemption. When Marcus realized what his betrayal had truly cost, He swore a blood oath. His bloodline would serve and protect any surviving Silvermoon heirs until the crown could be restored. Even though restoring it might mean your death? Especially then. They had been flying for nearly an hour when the forest below began to change. The trees grew taller, more ancient, and Lyra could feel power thrumming in the air like a living thing. Moonlight seemed to gather and pool in clearings that formed patterns visible only from above, ritual circles that had been maintained for centuries. Moonspire territory, Kale explained. Your ancestral lands. No other house has been able to claim them because he didn't need to finish. Lyra could feel it now. The land itself recognized her. Every tree, every stone, every stream sang with welcoming harmonies that resonated in her bones. This was home in a way that nowhere else had ever been. The castle appeared suddenly, as if stepping out of a dream. It wasn't ruins as she'd expected, but a living thing of silver stone and crystal, its towers reaching toward the stars like fingers of light. Gardens terraced down the mountainside in geometric patterns that seemed to shift and change as she watched, and at the very peak, a great beacon of moonfire burned like a welcoming star. How is it still here?
She breathed.
Silvermoon magic, Kale replied. The castle exists partially in the spirit realm. It can't be destroyed by earthly means, only claimed by one with the true bloodline. They landed on the highest balcony, and the moment Lyra's claws touched the silver stone, the entire structure came alive. Crystals embedded in the walls began to glow, casting rainbow patterns across the courtyards below. Fountains that had been dry for centuries suddenly sparkled with water that seemed to contain liquid starlight. And from somewhere deep in the castle's heart came a sound like singing, the voices of all the Silvermoon queens who had ruled before her, welcoming their heir home. Lyra shifted back to human form, the transformation as easy as breathing now that she was on her ancestral ground. But she kept her wings. They felt too natural, too much a part of her true self to dismiss. Welcome home, my lady, Kale said, also returning to human shape, but keeping his own midnight wings spread wide. Welcome to Moonspire, seat of your power and birthright. She walked to the edge of the balcony and looked out over the vast forest that spread below them. In the distance, she could see lights moving through the trees, their pursuers, no doubt, following their trail. But they couldn't fly, and they couldn't claim the castle. Here, at least, she was safe. For now, said a familiar voice behind her. Lyra spun to find the ghostly form of Queen Seraphina standing in the moonlight, her silver gown flowing like liquid mercury. The family resemblance was unmistakable, but there was a hardness in the ancient queen's eyes that spoke of battles fought and prices paid. Great-great-great-grandmother, Lyra said, offering a formal bow. Child of my blood, Seraphina replied, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. You have awakened at last. But awakening is only the beginning. The houses that hunt you will not stop simply because you've reached sanctuary. They will gather armies, forge new alliances, and try to finish what they started 300 years ago. Then what do I do? The ghost smiled, and for a moment, Lyra saw not the fallen queen but the woman she might have been in happier times. You do what every Silvermoon has done since the first of our line claimed the sky, Seraphina said. You fight. You lead. You prove that the blood of queens flows in your veins. She gestured toward the castle's great doors, which swung open at her command.
Come.
Let me show you what you've inherited. The weapons, the allies, the power that has waited 3 centuries for your return. And the price? Lyra asked quietly. Seraphina's smile faded. Everything, child.
As it always has been. As it always will be.
The crown is won through sacrifice, kept through strength, and passed on through blood. Are you prepared for that? Lyra looked at Kale, seeing the question in his golden eyes. He would follow her into battle, she knew. His family's oath bound him to her service until death or redemption. But she had to choose, the quiet life she'd always known, or the destiny that demanded everything she had to give. Below them, howls echoed through the night as their enemies gathered strength. Above them, the moon shone down like a silver crown, waiting to be claimed. I am Lyra of House Silvermoon, she said, and her voice carried the power of wind and storm. Last heir of the silver crown, daughter of sky and starlight. Let them come. The ancient castle sang its approval, and Queen Seraphina smiled as she began to fade into the light. Then let us prepare for war, my daughter. The dynasty will rise again, or die with honor in the attempt. Chapter 3. The ancient throne room of Shadowmere Castle materialized around Lyra, like smoke given form, stone walls bleeding through the veil of time as Kieran's hand pressed against the sacred bloodstone embedded in the ruins. The vision hit her with the force of ancestral memory, not her own, but carried in the marrow of her bones through generations of sleeping queens. This is how it began. Kieran's voice resonated with the weight of centuries, his fingers intertwined with hers as the past unfolded before them. Your ancestor, Queen Seraphina Shadowmere, ruled the greatest werewolf dynasty the world has ever known. The ghostly figures moved through the hall like echoes of glory, nobles in midnight velvet and silver, their eyes gleaming with otherworldly power. At the center sat a woman whose beauty could start wars, her raven hair crowned with a circlet of moonstone and starlight. The resemblance to Lyra was unmistakable, the same aristocratic cheekbones, the same storm-gray eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. She could heal with a touch, Kieran continued, his thumb tracing the pulse point on Lyra's wrist where her own healing gift lay dormant. Command the very elements to bend to her will. The Shadowmere bloodline was blessed by the moon goddess herself, each heir more powerful than the last. But even as the vision showed Seraphina's golden reign, shadows crept at the edges. Lyra watched her ancestor's face grow troubled, her hand instinctively moving to protect her swollen belly where the next generation of the bloodline grew. The Bloodfawn clan, Lyra whispered, the name tasting like copper and betrayal on her tongue. Knowledge she'd never learned flooded her consciousness, ancestral memories awakening as her bloodlines stirred to life. The scene shifted, showing a man with silver hair and eyes like winter frost. Valerius Bloodfawn, the queen's most trusted advisor, his handsome face a mask of calculated ambition. Lyra watched in horror as he knelt before Seraphina, his words honeyed poison. My queen, the northern territories grow restless. They question a female ruler, especially one carrying what could be a half-breed child. Seraphina's hand moved protectively over her stomach. The child I carry is destined for greatness. The prophecy speaks of. Prophecies can be misinterpreted. Valerius's smile never reached his cold eyes. Perhaps it would be wise to consider alternative bloodline succession. The Bloodfawn clan has always been loyal to the crown. Kieran's grip tightened on Lyra's hand as the vision intensified. He was already planning her downfall. The Bloodfangs had pure werewolf lineage, but they lacked the ancient magic that made the Shadowmere dynasty untouchable. Valerius coveted that power. The throne room dissolved, replaced by the castle's private chambers where Seraphina paced like a caged wolf, her mate nowhere to be seen. A woman with ethereal silver hair and eyes like starlight materialized, the moon goddess herself, her presence making the very air shimmer with divine power. My daughter, the goddess's voice was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. The darkness comes for your bloodline. You must choose, protect your unborn child or save your kingdom. I would die for both, Seraphina declared, her hand blazing with silver fire as her power responded to her emotions. Death is not what will be required of you. The goddess's expression grew sorrowful. Your bloodline must sleep, hidden from those who would destroy it. Your daughter will carry the gift, but it will remain dormant until the appointed time. Only when love awakens what slumbers can the dynasty rise again. Tears streamed down Seraphina's face as the weight of sacrifice settled upon her. How long must we wait? 3 centuries. When the moon bleeds silver and the stars align as they did at your birth, the last daughter will awaken. She will be tested, as you are tested now. Her heart will choose the fate of all werewolf kind. The vision shattered like glass as Lyra gasped, her own tears falling onto the ancient stones. The phantom throne room faded, leaving only the moonlit ruins and Kieran's steady presence beside her. "That's why my wolf never awakened," she breathed, understanding flooding through her like a dam bursting. "The goddess bound our power to protect us. And now it's stirring because you're here, in this place with me." Kieran turned to face her fully, his golden eyes intense with centuries of longing and duty. "Because the appointed time has come, and you're strong enough to handle the truth." "But I don't feel strong," Lyra admitted, her voice small in the vast ruins. "I can barely manage my normal life, let alone save an entire dynasty." Kieran cupped her face gently, his touch sending warmth through her chilled skin. "Seraphina said the same thing when the goddess first blessed her bloodline. Strength isn't about being fearless, Lyra. It's about choosing to act despite the fear." A howl echoed across the moors, long and haunting, followed by another, then another. Kieran's expression darkened as he pulled Lyra to her feet. "The Bloodfangs," he said grimly. "They've found us. Your awakening power is like a beacon to those who know what to look for." As if summoned by his words, shapes moved through the mist beyond the castle walls, wolves with eyes that glowed red instead of gold, their forms larger and more brutal than any natural creature. At their head stalked a massive black wolf with silver markings, his presence radiating ancient malice. "Valerius," Kieran growled, his own wolf pressing close to the surface. Still alive after all these centuries, still hunting Shadowmere blood. The black wolf shifted, bones cracking and reforming until a man stood in its place, tall, silver-haired, devastatingly handsome despite the centuries that had passed. He wore his immortality like a crown, his smile sharp as winter. "Little wolf," Valerius called out, his voice carrying easily across the ruins. "Did you really think you could hide from me forever? I can smell the Shadowmere magic awakening in your blood. It sings to me like it did in your ancestors' time." Lyra felt her birthmark burning like brand, power she didn't understand coursing through her veins like liquid fire. The ancient stones around them began to glow with silver light, responding to her presence. "You killed her," she said, stepping forward despite Kieran's protective growl. "You betrayed your queen." "I freed the werewolf nation from a bloodline that would have destroyed us all," Valerius countered, his red eyes fixed on her with predatory hunger. Seraphina was mating with outsiders, diluting the pure wolf blood with human weaknesses and fey magic. The Shadowmere line needed to end. But it didn't end, Lyra said, power building in her voice until it echoed with otherworldly authority. "And now I'm here to reclaim what was stolen." Valerius laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "You're untrained, untested, and alone except for this turncoat guardian. What could you possibly do against the combined might of the Bloodfawn Legion?" That's when Lyra felt them. Other presences stirring in the ruins around them. Ancient spirits awakening as her power called to them. The ghosts of Shadowmere queens past, still bound to the sacred grounds where they'd once ruled. Seraphina's spirit materialized first, her form translucent but radiating fierce maternal love and pride. "My daughter's daughter," she said, her voice like an echo of wind through time. "You are not alone. You have never been alone." More spirits followed, generations of Shadowmere queens, each adding their power to the growing storm of ancestral magic that swirled around Lyra like a silver cyclone. The very air crackled with the combined might of the royal bloodline, 3 centuries of suppressed power finally finding its voice. Valerius's confident expression faltered as he felt the true depth of what he faced. "Impossible. I destroyed that bloodline. I watched Seraphina die." "You watched her sacrifice herself to save her heir," Seraphina corrected, stepping protectively in front of Lyra. "Every queen who came after carried the sleeping gift, passing it down through the generations until it could be awakened at the appointed time. Your betrayal only made us stronger." The blood-fawn wolves behind Valerius whimpered and backed away as the spiritual power pressed against them like a physical force. This was magic older than their clan, deeper than their understanding. But Valerius himself stood firm, drawing on power that felt wrong, tainted somehow, like poison masquerading as strength. Even the dead cannot stand against what I have become. I have made alliances your precious bloodline never dreamed of." His form began to change, but not into a wolf. Something darker, more sinister, with eyes like burning coals and claws that dripped with shadows. The corruption of centuries had twisted him into something beyond nature. "Now," Kieran said urgently, his hand finding Lyra's. "The bloodline magic is strongest when channeled through love and trust. Let me anchor you." Lyra didn't fully understand what he meant, but her heart did. She let herself feel the connection between them. Not just the physical attraction that sparked whenever they touched, but the deeper bond that had been building since the moment their eyes met. The sense that they were two halves of something larger, destiny and choice intertwining. Power flowed between them like a river finding its course, her Shadowmere magic combining with his guardian strength to create something neither could achieve alone. The silver light intensified until the entire castle ruins blazed like a star fallen to earth. "This ends now," Lyra declared, her voice carrying the authority of every queen who had come before her. "The Shadowmere dynasty reclaims its throne." The battle for the ancient bloodline's future was about to begin. Chapter 4. The silver fire that blazed between Lyra and Kieran illuminated more than just the ancient ruins. It revealed the truth that had been hidden in shadow for 3 long centuries. As their combined power pushed back against Valerius and his corrupted legion, memories that weren't entirely her own flooded Lyra's consciousness. She saw Kieran as he had been then, younger, though still devastatingly handsome, kneeling before Queen Seraphina in the great hall of Shadowmere Castle. His hair had been darker, his face unmarked by the weight of centuries, but those same golden eyes burned with unwavering loyalty. Kieran Stormwolf of the Northern Territories, pledge my life to the protection of the Shadowmere bloodline," his younger self had declared, his voice ringing with the power of an oath that would bind his very soul. "Through darkness and light, through exile and return, until the last heir claims her throne, or my heart stops beating." Such dedication, Queen Seraphina had replied, her hand glowing with ancestral magic as she touched his forehead. "But the price of this oath will be higher than you know, young guardian. You will live while others die, wait while others find love, endure centuries of solitude for the sake of a prophecy that may never come to pass." "Then I will endure," Kieran had answered without hesitation. "The Stormwolf pack has served the crown for 1,000 years. I would rather spend eternity alone than let the bloodline fall." The memory shattered as Valerius's corrupted form lunged forward, his shadow-wreathed claws aimed directly at Lyra's heart. But Kieran was there instantly, his own transformation swift and magnificent, not into the monstrous thing Valerius had become, but into a wolf of pure silver and gold, his eyes blazing with the light of ancient vase. The two collided with the force of an avalanche, rolling across the sacred stones as power crackled around them. Where Valerius brought corruption and darkness, Kieran's presence seemed to cleanse the very air, his guardian magic burning away the shadows like dawn breaking over the mountains. 300 years I've searched for you," Valerius snarled as they grappled, his voice distorted by the evil that had consumed him. 300 years of hunting every bloodline remnant, every distant cousin, every bastard child who might carry even a drop of Shadowmere power. "And yet you never found them," Kieran replied, his own voice calm despite the violence of their battle. "Because I made sure of it. Every heir, every descendant, protected and hidden until the time was right." Lyra felt the truth of it wash over her, flashes of other lives, other faces that shared her features. Kieran moving through the centuries like a silent guardian angel, always watching, always protecting the scattered remnants of her bloodline until they could converge again in her. "The blacksmith's daughter in Scotland, 1847, she whispered, ancestral memories cascading through her awakened consciousness. "The seamstress in Prague, 1923. The librarian in Boston, 1995. Each woman had carried a piece of the Shadowmere gift, unknowing vessels keeping the bloodline alive until it could reunite in her generation. All of them were your ancestors," Kieran confirmed, never taking his eyes off Valerius even as he spoke to her. The moon goddess scattered the bloodline across the world to keep it safe, but she also ensured that it would eventually converge again. You are the culmination of centuries of love, sacrifice, and hope. Valerius let out a howl of pure rage, his form becoming even more twisted as dark magic consumed him. Sentimental fools. Love makes you weak, hope makes you vulnerable. I chose power over such pathetic emotions, and look what I've become. Indeed, what he had become was terrible to behold. Where once he might have been handsome in his silver-haired arrogance, now he was a nightmare of shadow and malice, his features distorted beyond recognition. The corruption hadn't just changed his appearance, it had eaten away at his very soul. "This is what awaits you if you choose wrongly," he said to Lyra, his red eyes gleaming with malicious glee. "The prophecy speaks of choice, little queen. You can restore your bloodline and doom yourself to the same weakness that destroyed Seraphina, or you can join with me. Together, we could rule not just the werewolf nation, but all supernatural creatures." For a moment, just a moment, Lyra felt the terrible allure of what he offered. Power without responsibility, strength without sacrifice. She could feel the dark magic calling to her, promising easy answers to complex problems. But then she looked at Kieran, saw the absolute faith in his eyes, and remembered the weight of the oath he had carried for 3 centuries. He had given up everything, love, companionship, a normal life, all for the promise that someday she would stand exactly where she stood now. "I choose love," she said simply, her voice carrying across the ruins with the authority of every queen who had come before her. "I choose sacrifice. I choose the hard path that leads to something greater than myself." The words themselves seemed to have power. The silver light around her intensified, and she felt the presence of every Shadowmere queen who had ever lived flowing through her like a river of starlight. Their combined strength was overwhelming, ancient magic that had been building for centuries finally finding its outlet. Valerius screamed as the light touched him, his corrupted form beginning to smoke and burn. "Impossible! I made bargains with powers older than your precious moon goddess. I cannot be destroyed by mere sentiment." "Not sentiment," Lyra corrected, stepping forward with Kieran at her side, their hands clasped as their power merged into something that was more than the sum of its parts.
Love.
The force that created the universe, that binds all things together, that makes sacrifice meaningful and hope possible. The ancestral spirits of the Shadowmere queens materialized more solidly around them, their combined presence turning the ruined castle into a ghostly echo of its former glory. Queen Seraphina stood at their head, her ethereal form glowing with maternal pride and ancient wisdom. "My daughter's daughter," she said, her voice carrying the authority of ages. "The choice is made. Let the bloodline be restored, let the dynasty rise again, and let love triumph over the darkness that has plagued our people for too long." Power erupted from Lyra like a star-going nova, silver fire racing across the moors and touching every living thing for miles around. She felt other werewolf packs stirring in the distance, scattered, hidden groups who had been waiting without knowing what they waited for. The descendants of the great houses who had served the Shadowmere crown, their own dormant gifts beginning to awaken as the royal bloodline reclaimed its throne. Valerius's screams of rage turned to shrieks of agony as the purifying light consumed the corruption that had sustained him for centuries. But instead of destroying him, Lyra made a choice that surprised everyone, including herself. "Enough," she said, and the silver fire pulled back, leaving Valerius on his knees but alive. Where moments before he had been a creature of shadow and malice, now he was simply a man, old, tired, and finally free of the darkness that had consumed him. "Why," he gasped, looking up at her with eyes that were no longer red but merely human. "I betrayed your bloodline. I murdered your ancestor. I would have killed you without hesitation. Because this is what separates the Shadowmere dynasty from everything that came before," Lyra replied, helping him to his feet with hands that still glowed with residual power. "We choose mercy over vengeance, healing over destruction. The cycle of betrayal and revenge ends with me." Kieran's expression was one of wonder and pride. This is why the moon goddess chose your bloodline, he said softly. Not just for your power, but for your wisdom, for your ability to see beyond the immediate desire for justice to something greater. Around them, the blood-fawn wolves that had followed Valerius were also transforming, not physically, but spiritually. The dark corruption that had bound them to their false leader was falling away, revealing frightened, confused pack members who had been enslaved by magic they didn't understand. Go, Lyra told them gently. Return to your families, your territories. Tell them that the Shadowmere dynasty has returned, but we come not as conquerors, but as protectors. Tell them that the old grudges are forgiven, the ancient feuds ended. We have work to do rebuilding our world, and we'll need everyone's help. As the former enemies scattered into the night, some still in wolf form and others having shifted back to human, Lyra felt the weight of true leadership settling on her shoulders. It wasn't the burden she had expected, not crushing or terrible, but warm and purposeful, like a cloak made of starlight and hope. The hardest part is over, Queen Seraphina's spirit said, her form beginning to fade as the immediate crisis passed. But the real work begins now. You must gather the scattered houses, unite the packs, and rebuild what was lost. It will take time, patience, and wisdom beyond your years. I won't be doing it alone, Lyra replied, squeezing Kieran's hand as she felt their bond deepening into something that transcended mere attraction. This was partnership, trust, and love that had been building across centuries. The Guardian's oath isn't finished yet. Kieran's smile was radiant with relief and joy. No, he agreed. It's just beginning. But this time, I won't be guarding from the shadows. This time, I'll be standing beside you in the light. As the first rays of dawn touched the ancient stones of Shadowmere Castle, Lyra felt her wolf stir for the first time in her life, not with hunger or rage, but with contentment and purpose. She was no longer just a lost young woman stumbling through a mundane existence. She was the last daughter of an ancient dynasty, the key to a prophecy fulfilled, and the beginning of a new age for all werewolf kind. But first, she had a bloodline to restore, a kingdom to rebuild, and a love story that had been 3 centuries in the making to fully explore. The Shadowmere dynasty had awakened, and the world would never be the same. Chapter 5. The ancient library of Shadowmere Castle had been hidden beneath layers of protective spells and centuries of debris, but as Lyra's power continued to awaken, the magical barriers dissolved like morning mist. Stone shelves emerged from nothingness, their surfaces lined with volumes bound in midnight leather and secured with silver clasps that bore the crescent moon seal of her dynasty. The Codex Lunaris, Kieran breathed, his voice filled with reverence as he approached a pedestal where a massive tome rested, its pages shimmering with their own inner light. I haven't seen this since Seraphina's reign. It contains every prophecy, every vision, every divine mandate given to the Shadowmere bloodline by the moon goddess herself. Lyra felt drawn to the book as if by invisible threads, her fingertips tingling with recognition as she touched its ancient binding. The moment her skin made contact with the leather, words began appearing on the open pages, not written in ink, but blazing with silver fire that shifted and danced like living moonbeams. In the twilight of the 3rd century, when hope has nearly died and the wolf nations have forgotten their true nature, shall come the last daughter. Born of scattered starlight and tempered by mortal struggles, she shall bear the mark of unity upon her flesh and the voice of ages in her heart. That's you, Kieran said softly, his hand covering hers where it rested on the page. The crescent moon birthmark, the way your voice carries otherworldly authority when your power rises. You're not just a descendant of the royal line, you're the culmination of it. The text continued to unfold, revealing prophecies that made Lyra's breath catch in her throat. 3 trials shall test her worth. The trial of heritage, where she must claim the memories of her bloodline. The trial of sacrifice, where she must choose between personal desire and the greater good, and the trial of unity, where she must bind the fractured houses into one people once more. We've already begun the first trial, Lyra realized, thinking of the visions that had shown her Queen Seraphina's story and the ancestral memories that continued to surface in her consciousness. When I saw the past, when I felt the weight of all those generations, that was the trial of heritage. And last night with Valerius, Kieran added, understanding dawning in his golden eyes, when you chose mercy over vengeance, healing over destruction, that was the trial of sacrifice. You put the welfare of all werewolf kind above your personal desire for justice. Lyra nodded, but her attention was already being drawn to the next passage, which glowed brighter than the rest. The guardian's heart shall be the key to all. He who has waded through centuries of loneliness, who has loved without hope and served without reward. When the last daughter claims her throne, she must also claim her mate, for their union shall forge a bond stronger than any magic, more enduring than any crown. Heat rushed through Lyra's veins as she read those words, her gaze lifting to meet Kieran's. The attraction between them had been building since their first meeting, but this went deeper than physical desire. This was recognition on a soul level, the acknowledgement of a connection that transcended time itself. 300 years, she whispered, her hand moving to cup his face. You've been alone for 300 years, waiting for me. Not waiting, he corrected, his voice rough with emotion. Living for this moment. Every century that passed, every lonely decade, every moment of doubt, it all led to you.
To this.
To us. The prophecy continued to reveal itself as they touched, the silver text flowing across multiple pages. But beware, for the union of souls brings with it the union of destinies. What befalls one shall befall the other. Should the last daughter fall to darkness, so too shall her guardian. Should she choose wrongly in the final trial, both bloodlines shall be extinguished forever. The final trial, Lyra murmured, a chill running down her spine despite the warmth of Kieran's presence. The trial of unity. What does that mean exactly? As if summoned by her question, the pages flipped of their own accord, revealing a section that made both of them gasp. The text here was accompanied by illustrations that moved like living paintings, scenes of werewolf packs scattered across the globe, their eyes dim with despair and disconnection. The wolf nations have forgotten their true nature, living as solitary hunters when they were meant to be unified guardians of the natural world. The last daughter must gather the 7 great houses and bind them once more under the ancient covenant. But know this, each house harbors old grievances, ancient jealousies, and blood feuds that have festered for centuries. The illustrations showed the emblems of each house: the silver wolf of Stormwolf, Kieran's house; the golden eagle of Sunspear; the crimson bear of Ironheart; the emerald stag of Thornwick; the sapphire raven of Nightwhisper; the amethyst fox of Mistvale; and at the center, the platinum moon of Shadowmere. 7 houses, Kieran said grimly, scattered across 7 continents, each one believing themselves to be the last of their kind. Some have grown savage in their isolation. Others have become so integrated with human society that they've nearly forgotten they're wolves at all. And we have to bring them all together? Lyra asked, feeling overwhelmed by the scope of what lay ahead. How is that even possible? With this, Kieran replied, touching a passage that glowed at his approach. The Moon Heart Ritual. It's an ancient ceremony that was used to crown the first Shadowmere queen millennia ago. When performed at the convergence of ley lines during the lunar eclipse, which happens in exactly 3 weeks, it will send out a call that no werewolf can ignore. They'll be compelled to come, whether they want to or not. Lyra studied the ritual described in the tome, her heart sinking as she read the requirements. Blood from the 7 houses, the crown of starlight, the blessing of the moon goddess herself. She looked up at Kieran with growing concern. The crown of starlight was destroyed when Valerius betrayed the kingdom. I saw it in the vision. Seraphina shattered it rather than let it fall into his hands. Not destroyed, a new voice said from the shadows. Hidden. Both Lyra and Kieran spun toward the sound, defensive magic crackling around them until they saw who had spoken. An elderly woman stepped into the moonlight streaming through the library windows, her silver hair braided with small bones and feathers, her eyes the deep purple of twilight skies. Elder Morgana, Kieran said, his posture relaxing slightly, though his hand remained ready to defend Lyra. I thought you died decades ago. I did, the old woman replied with a cackle that wasn't entirely sane. Been dead for 37 years, 2 months, and 16 days. Death is quite liberating, actually. Gives one perspective on what truly matters. Lyra felt no fear at the revelation that she was speaking to a spirit. After everything she'd experienced in the past few days, a dead elder seemed almost normal. You know where the crown of starlight is hidden? Know where it is? Child, I helped Seraphina hide it. Morgana's ghostly form glided closer, her ethereal fingers reaching out to touch the prophecy book. Where she made contact, new text appeared, directions written in a script so ancient that Lyra could only read it through her awakened bloodline memories. The Astral Grove, Kieran read over her shoulder, his voice filled with awe. The sacred space between the mortal realm and the divine. I've heard legends, but I never thought it actually existed. Oh, it exists, Morgana confirmed. But reaching it requires a sacrifice most are unwilling to make. To enter the Astral Grove, one must temporarily surrender their physical form, exist as pure spirit. It's uncomfortable, and there's always the risk that you might not find your way back to your body. Lyra felt a chill that had nothing to do with the dead elder's presence. How long do we have to retrieve the crown before the lunar eclipse? 3 weeks, Kieran replied grimly. But that's not our only problem. Even if we retrieve the crown and perform the moon heart ritual, we still need representatives from all 7 houses to make it work. And most of them don't even know the others exist. Leave that to me, Morgana said with another unsettling cackle. Being dead has its advantages. I can travel instantly to any place I've ever been, speak to any spirit that lingers, and I've been keeping tabs on the scattered houses for decades. The descendants are out there, even if they don't know their own heritage. The prophecy book flipped to a new section, showing detailed information about each house's current status. House Sunspear, last known descendant, Marcus Solberg, wildlife photographer in Kenya. Unawakened, but shows signs of ancestral connection to solar magic. House Ironheart, Elena Kowalski, emergency room surgeon in Chicago. Exhibits unusual healing abilities and abnormal strength during high-stress situations. House Thornwick, James Crawford, forest ranger in British Columbia. Can communicate with woodland creatures, though he believes it's simply an unusual talent. House Nightwhisper, Arya Chun, forensic psychologist in Tokyo. Experiences prophetic dreams she dismisses as intuition. House Mistvale, Sophie Dubois, perfumer in Lyon. Creates scents that can alter emotions and trigger memories. House Stormwolf, obviously Kieran, already awakened and serving as guardian. House Shadowmere, Lyra herself, the last daughter. They're all living normal human lives, Lyra observed, feeling a pang of sympathy for these people who were about to have their worlds turned upside down just as hers had been. How do we convince them to abandon everything they know to join a mystical ceremony they've never heard of? Carefully, Kieran replied. And truthfully. These are good people, Lyra. When they learn what they really are, when they understand what's at stake, they'll answer the call. The bloodline magic in their veins won't let them do otherwise. Morgana nodded approvingly. The boy speaks wisdom. But time grows short, and you have much to accomplish. The crown must be retrieved first. Without it, the ritual cannot begin. And be warned, Child of Shadowmere, the Astral Grove is guarded by more than distance and dimensional barriers. There are entities that do not wish to see the wolf nations reunited. What kind of entities? Lyra asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. The same forces that corrupted Valerius, Morgana replied, her expression growing grave. Ancient beings that feed on discord and division, that gain power when supernatural creatures remain isolated and weak. They've been working for centuries to keep the houses separated, and they won't give up easily. The weight of destiny pressed down on Lyra's shoulders like a physical force. 3 weeks to retrieve an ancient crown from a mystical realm, gather representatives from 7 scattered bloodlines, and perform a ritual that would either unite the werewolf nations or destroy them all. And all while being hunted by entities powerful enough to corrupt someone like Valerius. "We should start immediately," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "Tonight, if possible. The longer we wait, the more time our enemies have to prepare." Kieran's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. "Together?" he asked, though they both knew there was only one answer. "Together," she confirmed, feeling the truth of the prophecy settling into her bones. Their destinies were bound now, for better or worse. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as one. The Moon Heart ritual awaited, and with it, the future of all werewolf kind. But first, they had to survive the journey to retrieve the crown of starlight from a realm where death was just another doorway and ancient enemies waited in the shadows between worlds. Some quests required courage. Others demanded wisdom. This one would test the very limits of love itself. Chapter 6. The ritual circle carved into the highest tower of Shadowmere Castle had been hidden beneath centuries of ivy and neglect, but as Lyra and Kieran approached with Elder Morgana's spirit guiding them, the ancient symbols began to glow with anticipation. Each marking pulsed with a different color: silver for the moon, gold for the sun, and deep violet for the space between worlds where the astral grove existed. "Remember," Morgana cautioned, her ghostly form flickering in the pre-dawn darkness, "your physical bodies will remain here, vulnerable and undefended. The journey to the grove must be swift, for every moment you spend in spirit form increases the risk that you won't find your way back." Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs as she stepped into the center of the circle, Kieran's hand warm and solid in hers. The idea of temporarily abandoning her body was terrifying, but the alternative, facing the coming trials without the crown of starlight, was worse. "What if we get separated?" she asked, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at her since they'd made this decision. "We won't," Kieran replied with absolute certainty. "The prophecy says our destinies are bound. That bond exists on every level: physical, emotional, spiritual. Even in the space between worlds, I'll be able to find you." Elder Morgana began chanting in the ancient language of the first werewolves, her voice weaving through frequencies that seemed to bypass the ears and resonate directly in their souls. The ritual circle responded, lines of power racing along the carved channels like liquid starlight until the entire tower blazed with otherworldly energy. "Close your eyes," Morgana instructed. "Feel the silver cord that connects your spirit to your flesh. When I give the word, you must sever that cord willingly, trusting that love will guide you home." Lyra's wolf stirred uneasily as she followed the instructions, her consciousness turning inward to examine the metaphysical tethers that bound her soul to her body. There, a strand of silver light pulsing with her heartbeat, anchoring her to the mortal realm. "Now," Morgana commanded, and Lyra felt Kieran's spiritual presence reaching for hers as they simultaneously released their hold on physical existence. The sensation was indescribable, like falling upward through layers of reality while being turned inside out and dissolved into pure consciousness. Colors that had no names blazed across her vision, and sounds that existed beyond the range of mortal hearing sang through her very essence. Then, suddenly, she was standing in a grove unlike anything from the earthly realm. Trees of living crystal grew in perfect spirals, their branches heavy with fruit that glowed like captured starlight. The ground beneath her feet was soft and silver, made of what looked like compressed moonbeams, and the sky above swirled with galaxies that moved in slow, hypnotic patterns. "Lyra." Kieran's voice came from behind her, filled with the same wonder she felt. When she turned, she saw him as she'd never seen him before, his spiritual form radiating the true depth of his guardian power, silver and gold light dancing around him like a living aura. "You're beautiful," he breathed, and she realized she must appear equally transformed in this realm of pure spirit. At the center of the grove stood a single tree that dwarfed all the others, its trunk twisted with age beyond counting. Hanging from its lowest branch, suspended by chains of what looked like crystallized moonlight, was the crown of starlight. The artifact was breathtaking, a circlet of platinum so pure it seemed to emit its own luminescence, set with 7 stones that corresponded to the 7 great houses. Each gem pulsed with the unique energy of its bloodline: diamond for Shadowmere, topaz for Sunspear, ruby for Ironheart, emerald for Thornwick, sapphire for Nightwhisper, amethyst for Mistvale, and citron for Stormwolf. "It's magnificent," Lyra whispered, taking a step toward the ancient tree. "And heavily guarded," Kieran added grimly, his hand catching her arm before she could move closer. That's when she saw them, shapes moving between the crystal trees, their forms constantly shifting like smoke given malevolent purpose. The entities Morgana had warned them about, beings of pure discord and hatred that fed on the divisions between supernatural creatures. One of them stepped forward, its appearance stabilizing into something almost human but wrong in fundamental ways. Its smile was too wide, its eyes too deep, and when it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that made reality itself seem less certain. "Well, well," it said, its tone mockingly pleasant. "The last daughter comes to reclaim her birthright. How predictable." "Who are you?" Lyra demanded, drawing on her bloodline power to strengthen her spiritual form. Silver light blazed around her, but the entity seemed unimpressed. "We are the Forgotten," it replied, gesturing to the shadows that moved between the trees. "The first children of chaos, born in the spaces between creation. We were ancient when your moon goddess was still learning to weave light from darkness." More of them emerged from hiding, their forms a disturbing mixture of beauty and wrongness. Lyra counted at least a dozen, maybe more. It was hard to tell when they kept shifting and blending into each other like living nightmares. "For centuries, we have worked to keep the wolf nations divided," another one said, its voice like breaking glass. "Scattered, weak, fighting amongst themselves instead of fulfilling their true purpose as guardians of the natural balance. Why should we allow you to undo millennia of careful cultivation?" "Because," Kieran stepped forward, his own power blazing like a small sun, "you're parasites. You feed on discord and division, grow strong on hatred and fear. A united werewolf nation would starve you out of existence." The lead entity laughed, a sound that made the crystal trees ring like funeral bells. Such noble words from a guardian who has spent 3 centuries in solitude, pining for a woman who might never come. "Tell us, Kieran Stormwolf, what has your loyalty gained you? What has your sacrifice accomplished?" For a moment, doubt flickered across Kieran's face, and Lyra felt his spiritual form waver. The entities pressed closer, sensing weakness like sharks scenting blood. "Nothing," one of them whispered seductively. 300 years of loneliness for a prophecy that might be nothing but wishful thinking. 300 years of denying yourself love, companionship, a normal life for what? For a woman who didn't even know you existed until a few days ago. "Stop," Lyra said sharply, moving to stand beside Kieran, her hand finding his in the space between worlds. His sacrifice wasn't for nothing. It was for hope. For the belief that something better was possible, even when there was no evidence to support that belief. That's not weakness. That's the strongest kind of faith. The moment their spiritual forms touched, power exploded outward from their joined hands. Not just Lyra's silver moonlight or Kieran's golden guardian fire, but something new, a force that was greater than the sum of its parts, love made manifest in the realm of pure spirit. The entities shrieked and fell back, their forms becoming less solid as the combined power of the bonded mates washed over them. This was what they feared most, not just unity, but unity born of genuine love and sacrifice rather than mere duty or ambition. The prophecy, Lyra realized, understanding flooding through her as their power continued to build. It wasn't just about my bloodline or Kieran's oath. It was about proving that love could create something stronger than chaos, something that could heal the divisions that have plagued our people for centuries. Together, they walked toward the great tree, the entities unable to approach as long as their spiritual bond blazed between them. The crown of starlight seemed to recognize their approach, its 7 stones pulsing in harmony with their combined heartbeats. But as Lyra reached for the artifact, The largest of the entities made one final desperate attempt to stop them. It shed its almost human appearance entirely, becoming a writhing mass of shadow and malice that blocked out the swirling galaxies above. "If we cannot have division," it roared, its voice shaking the very foundations of the grove, "then we will have destruction. Better to rule over ashes than to fade into nothing." The shadow thing lunged forward, not at them, but at the tree itself. If it could destroy the crown of starlight here in the astral grove, the artifact would be lost forever, making the moon heart ritual impossible. Without thinking, Lyra threw herself between the entity and the tree, her spiritual form blazing with every ounce of power she possessed. The impact was like being hit by a collapsing star, agony beyond description as the creature's chaotic essence tried to tear her apart on a molecular level. "Lyra!" Kieran's anguished cries seemed to come from very far away, though she knew he was right beside her. She felt him pouring his own power into her, trying to shield her from the worst of the entity's assault, but it wasn't enough. The thing was too strong, too driven by millennia of hatred and hunger. But then, just as her spiritual form began to fragment under the assault, she heard other voices, familiar ones that filled her with strength and purpose. "We stand with you, daughter of our line." Queen Seraphina's spirit called across the dimensional barriers, her presence blazing like a second sun in the grove. More voices joined hers. Generations of Shadowmere queens, their combined power flowing across the void to strengthen their last daughter. But they weren't alone. Lyra felt other presences too, spirits she didn't recognize, but whose power felt familiar nonetheless. The ancestors of the Seven Houses. Kieran breathed in wonder, his own spiritual form growing brighter as ancient Stormwolf guardians lent him their strength. "They're all here." Indeed they were, centuries of werewolf royalty and their sworn protectors, all those who had died believing in a prophecy that promised eventual unity. Their combined presence turned the astral grove into a blazing beacon of hope that no amount of chaos could extinguish. The shadow entity shrieked as the ancestral power struck it, its form beginning to dissolve under the combined assault of love, sacrifice, and unshakable faith. "This is not possible," it gasped as it was torn apart by forces it could never understand. "It's love," Lyra said simply, reaching up to claim the crown of starlight as the last of the entities fled back into the spaces between worlds. "It's hope. It's the belief that tomorrow can be better than today, and the willingness to sacrifice for that belief. You never stood a chance." The crown settled into her hands with a sensation like coming home, its 7 stones blazing with the full power of the united bloodlines. But even as she held the artifact that would allow them to perform the moon heart ritual, she felt the pull of the silver cord calling her back to her physical form. "Time to go," Kieran said, his hand finding hers once more as the astral grove began to fade around them. "We have a dynasty to restore." The journey back to their bodies was swifter than the trip out, their spirits snapping back into physical form with enough force to leave them both gasping on the tower floor. Elder Morgana's ghost was waiting for them, her expression one of profound relief. "Well done," she said simply. "The crown of starlight hasn't left the astral grove in over 3 centuries. Its presence in the mortal realm again will send ripples through every supernatural community on Earth." Lyra looked down at the crown in her hands, its beauty unmarred by their harrowing journey. In 2 weeks, she would place this artifact on her head and perform a ritual that would either unite the 7 great houses or destroy them all. But first, they had to gather the descendants and convince them to risk everything for a legacy they didn't even know they possessed. The real work was just beginning. Chapter 7. The emergency room at Chicago General Hospital buzzed with its usual controlled chaos, but Dr. Elena Kowalski had always thrived in that environment. Her colleagues often joked that she had supernatural instincts when it came to trauma cases, an uncanny ability to sense which patients needed immediate attention and which could wait. They had no idea how literally true that was. Elena's hands glowed with a faint warmth as she worked on a car accident victim, her touch somehow accelerating the healing process in ways that medical science couldn't explain. She'd learned early in her career to be subtle about it, to let others attribute her success rate to skill and experience rather than something far more extraordinary. Which was why she nearly dropped her instruments when a voice behind her said, "Dr. Elena Kowalski, last daughter of House Ironheart, your queen has need of you." She spun around to find a woman with storm-gray eyes and an aura of otherworldly authority standing in her trauma bay. The woman wore jeans and a simple sweater, but she carried herself like royalty, and the air around her seemed to shimmer with barely contained power. "I'm sorry, but this is a restricted area," Elena said automatically, though something deep in her chest was responding to the stranger's presence, a recognition that bypassed logic and spoke directly to her DNA. "You need to." "My name is Lyra Shadowmere," the woman interrupted gently, and Elena felt her world tilt on its axis. That name meant something, resonated through her bones like an echo of distant thunder. "And you're going to want to sit down for this conversation." Across the globe in Kenya's Masai Mara, wildlife photographer Marcus Solberg was tracking a pride of lions when the air around him began to shimmer like a heat mirage. He'd been photographing the big cats for 3 days, somehow managing to get closer than any human safely should, when a golden wolf appeared at the edge of his peripheral vision. The wolf's eyes held far too much intelligence for any natural animal, and when it spoke in a voice like warm honey over steel, Marcus didn't even question the impossibility of it. "Marcus Solberg of House Sunspear," the wolf said, its form beginning to shift and blur. "The time has come to remember who you truly are." In the misty forests of British Columbia, Ranger James Crawford was communing with a family of black bears when the trees themselves began to whisper his name. The bears looked up in alarm, not at him, but at something approaching through the undergrowth, something that made every wild thing in the forest fall silent with respect. "James Crawford," a voice called through the mist, and he turned to see a woman emerging from between the massive cedars, her dark hair adorned with feathers and small bones, her eyes the deep purple of twilight. "Your ancestors served the crown faithfully. Will you?" In Tokyo, forensic psychologist Dr. Arya Chen woke from another prophetic dream to find a silver raven perched on her apartment balcony. The bird's presence felt significant in a way that made her pulse quicken, especially when it began to speak in perfect Japanese. "The dreams that have been haunting you aren't symptoms of stress," the raven said, its voice eerily human. "They're memories of futures yet to come. Your queen needs your gift," Arya Chen of House Night Whisper. In Lion, perfumer Sophie Dubois was creating a new fragrance when the scent began to change of its own accord, transforming into something that smelled like moonlight and ancient magic. Her hands trembled as she recognized the aroma from dreams she'd been having since childhood, dreams of running through midnight forests on 4 legs, of howling at stars that sang back in harmonious chorus. "Sophie Dubois," a voice whispered from the very air around her, and she turned to see a woman materializing from what looked like solidified mist. "Your nose knows truth from lies, hope from despair. House Mistvale has always been the counselors of queens. Will you take up that mantle again?" One by one, the descendants were found, approached, and given a choice that would change their lives forever. Some, like Elena, initially resisted, too grounded in the rational world to easily accept the existence of magic and destiny. Others, like Marcus, felt relief at finally having an explanation for abilities they'd never understood. But in the end, they all said yes. How could they not, when their very souls sang with recognition at the sound of their house names, when their blood called out to the royal presence that summoned them? Within 48 hours of retrieving the crown of starlight, Lyra found herself standing in the restored Great Hall of Shadowmere Castle, looking at 6 individuals who represented the scattered bloodlines of the greatest werewolf dynasty in history. Each bore the mark of their heritage, subtle signs that only someone with awakened sight could recognize. Elena's hands still glowed faintly with healing warmth, and her posture spoke of the unbreakable strength that had always defined House Ironheart. Marcus radiated a solar energy that made plants turn toward him as if he were a second sun, the mark of Sunspear royalty. James moved with the fluid grace of someone who belonged in the wild spaces, small woodland creatures following him like a gentle Pied Piper. Arya's eyes held depths that seemed to see beyond the present moment, the gift of prophecy that ran strong in Night Whisper blood. Sophie was surrounded by an aura of sense that shifted with her emotions, the signature ability of House Mistvale. And Kieran stood beside Lyra like a golden pillar of strength, his presence completing the circle of the 7 great houses. "I still can't quite believe this is real," Elena said, flexing her fingers as she watched them glow with increasing brightness. "Yesterday, I was a trauma surgeon. Today I'm apparently werewolf royalty. The awakening can be disorienting," Lyra acknowledged, remembering her own shock when her world had been turned upside down just days before. "But you've always known you were different, haven't you? The way you could heal with your touch, the strength that came when you needed it most." Elena nodded slowly. "I thought everyone could do it. When I was a child, I couldn't understand why other people couldn't make pain go away just by wanting it to stop. And I've been having the same recurring dream for 20 years, Arya added, her voice thoughtful. "A great gathering under a blood moon, 7 houses uniting to save the world from something dark and terrible. I thought it was just my subconscious processing work stress." "It wasn't a dream," Lyra said gently. "It was a vision of this moment, of what we're about to attempt." She gestured to the ancient ritual circle that had been carved into the floor of the great hall, its intricate patterns inlaid with silver and precious stones. At the center stood a pedestal where the crown of starlight would rest during the ceremony, its 7 gems already responding to the presence of their respective bloodlines. "The Moon Heart Ritual," Kieran explained, his voice carrying the weight of ancient knowledge. "It hasn't been performed in over 3 centuries, not since the dynasty fell. If successful, it will create a mystical bond between all 7 houses, allowing us to coordinate and protect supernatural communities worldwide." "And if it fails?" Marcus asked, though his golden eyes already held the fierce loyalty that marked him as true Sunspear nobility. "If it fails," Lyra said honestly, "the magical backlash will likely kill us all, and the werewolf nations will remain scattered and vulnerable until some other threat eventually destroys them entirely." Silence fell over the group as the weight of what they were attempting settled upon them. These weren't trained warriors or experienced magic users. They were ordinary people who had been living normal lives until a few days ago. The idea that the fate of their entire species rested in their hands was overwhelming. "Why us?" James asked quietly, his connection to the natural world making him acutely sensitive to the magical currents swirling through the castle. "There must be others with stronger bloodlines, more training, better preparation." "Because," Sophie said suddenly, her voice carrying the conviction of newfound understanding, "we're the ones who chose to answer the call. Power without choice is tyranny. Choice without sacrifice is meaningless. We're here because we looked at the impossible and decided to believe anyway." Lyra felt her heart swell with pride and affection for these brave souls who had given up everything they knew to stand with her. "The lunar eclipse begins in 12 hours, she said, looking at each of them in turn. "We have that long to prepare, to say goodbye to our old lives, and to ready ourselves for whatever comes next." "What about the entities?" Elena asked, her medical training making her focus on potential complications. Elder Morgana mentioned that there were forces working against werewolf unity. "Won't they try to stop the ritual?" Kieran's expression darkened. "They'll definitely try. The Forgotten aren't the only beings that benefit from our division. There are vampires who prefer weak, scattered werewolf packs they can pick off individually. Fae courts that enjoy playing the houses against each other for their own amusement. Human organizations that find it easier to control supernatural populations when they're fragmented." "But," Lyra added, silver light beginning to dance around her hands as her power responded to her determination, "we have something they don't expect. We have love. Not just romantic love," she said, glancing at Kieran with warmth that made several of the others smile, "but the love of family, of purpose, of hope itself. That's what powered the original Shadowmere dynasty, and it's what will power us now." As if summoned by her words, Elder Morgana's spirit materialized in the great hall, her ghostly form more solid than usual. "The preparations are complete," she announced. "The ley lines are aligned, the sacred grove is prepared, and the moon goddess herself has blessed the undertaking. All that remains is for you to choose, one final time, whether you're willing to risk everything for the chance at something better." 7 pairs of eyes met Lyra's, each reflecting the same mix of fear and determination that she felt in her own heart. They had all given up their normal lives to be here. They had all chosen to believe in something larger than themselves. "Together?" she asked, extending her hand toward the center of their circle. "Together," they replied as one, their hands joining hers in a pledge that transcended mere words. The moon heart ritual awaited, and with it, the future of every werewolf on Earth. In a few hours, they would either restore the greatest supernatural dynasty in history or die trying. But as Lyra looked around at the faces of her newly awakened family, she found herself believing, truly believing, that love would be enough to see them through. Chapter 8. The lunar eclipse began at precisely 11:47 p.m., casting an eerie crimson glow across the moors surrounding Shadowmere Castle. As the Earth's shadow crept across the moon's surface, transforming its silver light into something that looked like spilled blood, the ancient stones of the castle began to hum with awakening power. Lyra stood at the center of the ritual circle, the crown of starlight resting on her brow like it had been made for her. Its 7 gems pulsed in perfect synchronization with her heartbeat, each stone blazing with the unique energy of its corresponding house. Around her, the 6 representatives formed a perfect hexagon, their hands linked as power began to flow between them like visible lightning. "Remember," Elder Morgana's spirit called from the shadows, her ghostly form more translucent than usual as the ritual drew energy from every supernatural source in the vicinity. "The moon heart ritual requires absolute trust. One moment of doubt, one instant of hesitation, and the magical backlash will tear you all apart." Elena felt sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool night air, her medical training warring with the mystical energy coursing through her veins. "What exactly happens when the ritual begins?" she asked, her voice tight with controlled fear. "We become one," Kieran replied, his golden eyes reflecting the blood moon's ominous light. "Not just allies or friends, but a single entity with 7 aspects. Our minds will touch, our souls will merge, and our individual powers will combine into something greater than any of us could achieve alone." "And that doesn't terrify you?" Marcus asked, though his own Sunspear heritage was singing with anticipation. He could feel solar energy building in his chest, preparing to answer the moon's crimson call. "It terrifies me," Lyra admitted honestly, her storm-gray eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. "But not as much as the alternative. Not as much as watching our people remain scattered and vulnerable while forces beyond our understanding work to keep us divided." James nodded, his connection to the natural world making him acutely aware of the magical currents swirling around them. Every tree on the moors was leaning toward the castle, every nocturnal creature had fallen silent in anticipation. "The earth itself is waiting," he murmured. "I can feel it holding its breath." As the eclipse reached totality, the blood moon hanging directly overhead like a crimson eye, the ritual circle erupted with silver fire. The ancient symbols carved into the stone blazed with their own inner light, creating a pattern that seemed to extend beyond the physical realm into dimensions that mortal eyes could barely perceive. "Now," Lyra said, her voice carrying the authority of every Shadowmere queen who had come before her. "Let the moon heart ritual begin." The first sensation was warmth, not physical heat, but a spiritual fire that seemed to burn away the barriers between individual consciousnesses. Lyra felt Elena's unwavering dedication to healing, Marcus's fierce protective instincts, James's deep love for the wild places of the world. She experienced Aria's gift for seeing truth through deception, Sophie's ability to understand the hidden emotions that drove human behavior, and Kieran's centuries of patient loyalty and love. But the connection went deeper than mere empathy. As the ritual progressed, she began to access their memories, their skills, their very essences. Through Elena, she understood the precise mechanics of accelerated healing. Through Marcus, she felt the solar energy that could banish darkness and fear. Through James, she connected to the vast network of natural spirits that existed just beyond human perception. The others were experiencing the same phenomenon, their individual abilities expanding exponentially as they gained access to powers that had been dormant for centuries. Elena's healing touch began to glow with silver moonlight. Marcus's solar energy took on new depth and complexity. James found himself able to communicate not just with animals, but with the very spirits of the land itself. Arya gasped as visions flooded her consciousness, not just glimpses of possible futures, but clear sight of the mystical forces that moved behind the veil of ordinary reality. Sophie's enhanced senses expanded beyond physical sense to detect the emotional and spiritual emanations of every living thing within miles. And Kieran felt the guardian bonds that had defined his existence for 3 centuries expanding to encompass not just Lyra, but all of them. His protective instincts multiplied 7-fold, his strength growing to match his expanded responsibilities. "It's working," Sophie breathed, her voice filled with wonder as she felt their individual essences beginning to merge into something unprecedented. "I can feel all of you, like you're part of me now." But that's when the first attack came. Shadows erupted from the ground around the castle, not natural darkness, but something that actively devoured light and hope. The entities that Lyra and Kieran had faced in the Astral Grove had returned with reinforcements, beings of pure malice that fed on discord and division, determined to prevent the werewolf houses from uniting. "The Forgotten!" Kieran shouted, his form blazing with guardian fire as he tried to maintain the ritual circle while defending against the assault. "They're trying to break our concentration." The shadow creatures poured toward the castle like a tide of liquid nightmare, their forms constantly shifting between almost human shapes and abstract geometries of hate. As they approached the ritual circle, reality itself seemed to bend and warp around them, the very air becoming thick with despair. "Don't break the circle," Lyra commanded, even as part of her wanted to drop her companion's hands and flee from the approaching horror. "Whatever happens, we have to maintain the connection." That's when she felt it, the presence that had been orchestrating their enemies' movements from the beginning. Not one of the chaotic entities, but something far older and more dangerous. A consciousness that radiated cold intelligence and patient malice, something that had been manipulating events from the shadows for millennia. The presence spoke, its voice seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Did you really think it would be so easy? That you could simply perform an ancient ritual and undo centuries of careful work? I am Malphas, first of the fallen, and I have been sowing discord among the supernatural races since before your precious moon goddess learned to weave silver from starlight." The revelation hit them like a physical blow. Not just random entities of chaos, but one of the original fallen angels, a being powerful enough to corrupt entire civilizations, ancient enough to remember the creation of the first werewolves. "Malphas," Elder Morgana's spirit whispered, her ghostly form flickering with fear. "I should have sensed his presence, should have warned you. He's been hiding behind the lesser entities, using them as a screen while he worked to prevent this moment." The fallen angel's laughter echoed across the moors, a sound that made the blood moon flicker and dim. "For 3,000 years, I have ensured that the children of the moon remained scattered, weak, fighting amongst themselves instead of fulfilling their true purpose as guardians of the natural balance. Why would I allow 7 amateur mystics to undo my masterwork?" Power crashed against the ritual circle like a tsunami of darkness, causing the ancient stones to crack and the silver fire to falter. The 7 representatives staggered under the assault, their mystical connection wavering as doubt and fear flooded their minds. "He's too strong," Elena gasped, her healing abilities struggling to maintain their spiritual cohesion as Malphas's influence tried to tear them apart. "I can feel him in my head, showing me all the patients I couldn't save, all the times my power wasn't enough." "It's illusion," Arya said desperately, her gift for truth allowing her to see through some of the deception. "He's weaponizing our self-doubt, our fears, our guilt. Don't listen to the lies. But even knowing it was manipulation didn't make it easier to resist. Marcus found himself reliving every moment of loneliness from his solitary career, every time he'd felt disconnected from humanity. James was overwhelmed with visions of forests burning, wildlife dying, the natural world he loved being destroyed by human greed and indifference. Sophie was drowning in a sensory overload of every negative emotion she'd ever encountered: fear, hate, despair, hopelessness, while Kieran was forced to experience 3 centuries of isolation and longing amplified to unbearable levels. But Lyra found herself facing something worse than personal torment. Malphas was showing her the faces of every werewolf who would die if the ritual failed, every supernatural community that would fall to hunters and prejudice, every child who would grow up alone and afraid because the houses remained divided. You see, the fallen angel's voice was almost gentle now, seductive in its reasonableness. The weight of responsibility is crushing, isn't it? So much easier to simply let go, to accept that some things are beyond mortal power to change. For a moment, just a moment, Lyra wavered. The burden was overwhelming, the odds impossible, the enemy too powerful to defeat. How could 7 people, most of whom had learned about their heritage just days ago, stand against a being that had been manipulating supernatural politics for millennia? But then she felt it, a warmth that had nothing to do with magic and everything to do with the bonds they had forged. Not just the mystical connection of the ritual, but something deeper. Elena's quiet courage in the face of medical impossible cases. Marcus's determination to protect wildlife even when it seemed like a losing battle. James's faith that the natural world was worth defending despite humanity's failures. Aria's commitment to seeking truth even when it was painful. Sophie's compassion for others even when their emotions were difficult to bear. And Kieran's unwavering love and loyalty that had sustained him through 3 centuries of solitude. "No," Lyra said, her voice growing stronger as she drew on the strength of her companions. "You're wrong. The weight isn't crushing when it's shared. The responsibility isn't too much when it's freely chosen. And love is always stronger than fear." The ritual circle blazed with renewed intensity as the 7 representatives reaffirmed their commitment to each other and their cause. But now their power was different, not just magical energy, but something that transcended the mystical realm entirely. Together, they said as one, their voices harmonizing into a sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of reality. And for the first time in 3,000 years, Malphas, first of the fallen, felt the cold touch of genuine fear. Chapter 9. The fear that rippled through Malphas was like a crack in the foundation of reality itself. For 3 millennia, the fallen angel had been a force of absolute corruption, bending supernatural races to his will through division and despair. But now, faced with 7 souls united by something he had never truly understood, his carefully constructed dominion began to tremble. "Impossible," he snarled, his voice losing its seductive reasonableness and revealing the raw hatred beneath. "Love is weakness. Unity is fragility. I have proven this truth across 1,000 worlds." But even as he spoke, the ritual circle was transforming. What had begun as 7 individuals sharing power was becoming something unprecedented, a single consciousness with 7 aspects, each one strengthening the others exponentially. Lyra could feel her companions not as separate people, but as extensions of herself, and through their eyes she saw the battle from 7 different perspectives simultaneously. Through Elena's medical knowledge, she understood exactly how Malphas's corruption spread, like a spiritual virus that attacked the bonds between people, making them doubt their connections to others. Through Marcus's solar energy, she could see the false shadows the fallen angel cast, illusions designed to make hope seem impossible. Through James's connection to nature, she felt the way Malphas's presence poisoned the very earth beneath his feet. Aria's prophetic gift showed her glimpses of possible futures, some where they succeeded in binding the houses together, others where Malphas's victory led to centuries of supernatural warfare. Sophie's enhanced empathy allowed her to feel the genuine love and loyalty that connected not just their group, but every werewolf pack that still remembered the old stories, every supernatural community that longed for the unity they had lost. And through Kieran's guardian bond, she felt the weight of every oath sworn to protect the innocent, every sacrifice made in service of something greater than oneself. "You want to know the truth about love?" Lyra said, her voice now carrying harmonics from all 7 bloodlines. "It's not weakness. It's the force that holds atoms together, that keeps stars burning, that drives evolution toward greater complexity and beauty. You fear it because it's the one thing in the universe you can never corrupt or control." Malphas's form began to shift, abandoning all pretense of beauty or reason. What emerged was horror incarnate, a being of pure negation, absence given shape and malice. Where he stood, colors bled away, warmth died, and hope itself seemed to wither. "Then I will destroy you," he declared, raising hands that dripped with the essence of endings. "If I cannot corrupt you, I will simply unmake you from existence itself." The attack that followed was beyond physical violence. It was an assault on the very concept of their being. Malphas reached into the quantum foundation of reality and tried to edit them out of existence, to make it so they had never been born, never lived, never loved. But the 7-fold bond held. Where one consciousness might have been overwhelmed by such an attack, 7 working in perfect harmony created a redundancy that even a fallen angel couldn't breach. Every time Malphas tried to erase one of them, the others would reach across the mystical connection and pull their companion back from the brink of non-existence. "Impossible!" Malphas shrieked as his ultimate weapon failed. "Nothing should be able to resist complete negation." "You're right," Lyra replied, her form now blazing with the combined power of all 7 houses. "Nothing can resist it. But we're not nothing, we're everything. We're love made manifest, hope given form, the proof that connection is stronger than isolation." The ritual circle erupted with light that went beyond the visible spectrum, not just illumination, but the fundamental force that had spoken the universe into existence. This was the power that the original Shadowmere dynasty had tapped into, the reason the moon goddess had chosen their bloodline to guard the supernatural world. But Malphas was ancient and cunning, and he had not survived 3 millennia without learning to adapt. If raw power wouldn't defeat them, then he would try a different approach. "Very well," he said, his form stabilizing into something almost human again. "If you insist on unity, then let me show you what your precious togetherness truly costs." The vision that crashed into their merged consciousness was devastating in its clarity. They saw the future that would result from their success. Werewolf packs united under the restored Shadowmere dynasty, but at a terrible price. The visibility that came with unity would attract attention from human governments, from vampire covens, from fey courts that preferred the supernatural world to remain fractured and weak. Wars would follow. Betrayals. Innocent people, human and supernatural alike, would die in conflicts that could have been avoided if the werewolf houses had simply remained hidden and scattered. "Is this the future you want?" Malphas asked, his voice once again seductive in its reasonableness. "Death and suffering on a scale not seen for centuries, all because you insisted on restoring a dynasty that fell for good reason." For a moment, doubt crept into their merged consciousness. Through the mystical bond, they could feel each other's horror at the potential consequences of their actions. Elena, with her healer's instincts, recoiled from the vision of mass casualties. James felt sick at the thought of supernatural conflicts spilling over into the natural world he cherished. But then Aria's prophetic gift kicked in, and she began to see deeper into the visions Malphas was showing them. "Wait," she said, her voice cutting through the doubt like a knife. "These aren't prophecies, they're possibilities based on fear. Look deeper. Look at what happens if we don't unite the houses." The true visions came flooding through, futures where the werewolf packs remained scattered and vulnerable, picked off one by enemies who understood that division made them weak. Supernatural communities driven extinct by hunters who could target them individually. A world where magic itself began to fade as those who could wield it became too isolated to maintain their traditions. You're showing us worst-case scenarios based on our success, Lyra realized, her voice growing stronger as she saw through the deception. But you're hiding the catastrophic futures that result from our failure. You want us to choose the slow death of isolation over the challenging path of unity. Malthus snarled as his manipulation was exposed, his form beginning to waver as the sevenfold consciousness rejected his influence entirely. Clever little mortals. But even if you see through my deceptions, you cannot change the fundamental truth. Unity requires sacrifice. Are you prepared to pay that price? Yes, they said as one, their voices creating harmonies that seemed to heal the very air around them. We are. The admission triggered the final phase of the Moon Heart ritual. The crown of starlight on Lyra's brow blazed with light that could be seen from orbit, its 7 gems resonating with frequencies that called to every werewolf bloodline on Earth. From Alaska to Argentina, from Scotland to New Zealand, dormant werewolves felt something stir in their chests, a recognition of home they had never experienced before. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Across the globe, werewolf packs that had been hiding in isolation for generations began to howl, not in loneliness or territorial challenge, but in joy and recognition. The sound carried on frequencies beyond the merely audible, creating a worldwide chorus that announced to every supernatural being on Earth that the age of division was ending. But the most profound change was happening within the ritual circle itself. The 7 representatives were no longer individuals sharing power. They had become something new entirely. A collective consciousness that retained the best aspects of each personality while transcending the limitations of any single perspective. Through this unity, they could feel the threads that connected every werewolf pack, every supernatural community, every being that carried even a drop of magical blood. The network that Malthus had spent millennia trying to sever was reweaving itself, stronger than it had ever been before. No, Malthus roared, his form beginning to discorporate as the very foundations of his power crumbled. I will not be defeated by mortal sentiment. I am eternal. I am inevitable. You are alone, Lyra replied, her voice now carrying the authority of every werewolf pack on Earth, every supernatural community that had chosen connection over isolation. And that is why you will always lose. Because no matter how powerful you become, no matter how clever your manipulations, you can never understand the force that binds us together. The fallen angel made one final, desperate attempt to destroy them, pouring every ounce of his ancient power into an attack designed to shatter their unity. But the blow that should have unmade them simply passed through their merged consciousness like wind through flame. They were no longer vulnerable to his corruption because they were no longer separate individuals that could be turned against each other. They had become something he could never touch, never understand, never defeat, a living embodiment of the truth that love multiplies rather than divides, that unity creates strength rather than weakness. With a scream that shattered windows across 3 counties, Malthus was banished from the mortal realm, cast back into whatever pit had spawned him. His 3,000-year campaign of division and discord had finally come to an end. As the blood moon reached its zenith, the 7 representatives felt their individual consciousnesses beginning to separate again, but they were changed now, forever connected by bonds that transcended physical distance and even death itself. They were no longer just Elena Kowalski, Marcus Solberg, James Crawford, Arya Chen, Sophie Dubois, Kieran Stormwolf, and Lyra Shadowmere. They were the 7, the restoration of the ancient covenant, the living proof that unity was not only possible but inevitable when beings chose love over fear. The Moon Heart ritual was complete, and the supernatural world would never be the same. Chapter 10. The first rays of sunlight to touch the moors after the blood moon's retreat carried with them a quality that hadn't existed for 3 centuries, hope made tangible, possibility given form. As the crimson light faded from the lunar surface, replaced by the gentle gold of dawn, the 7 representatives of the great houses found themselves forever changed by what they had experienced. Lyra stood at the center of the ritual circle, the crown of starlight still resting on her brow but no longer blazing with desperate power. Now it glowed with a steady, serene light that spoke of balance restored and promises kept. Around her, the 6 others were slowly returning to their individual consciousnesses, but the bonds forged during the ritual remained, a network of connection that would never truly fade. "Is it over?" Elena asked, her voice hoarse from the strain of channeling power beyond mortal comprehension. Her hands still glowed with healing warmth, but the light was softer now, more controlled. "The ritual is complete," Kieran confirmed, his golden eyes reflecting both exhaustion and profound satisfaction. "But in many ways, our real work is just beginning." Even as he spoke, the truth of his words became apparent. Across the grounds of Shadowmere Castle, figures were materializing. Not enemies this time, but pilgrims. Werewolves who had felt the call of the Moonheart ritual and traveled through the night to reach the restored seat of their ancient dynasty. They came in ones and twos at first, then in larger groups. A pack from the Scottish Highlands, their alpha carrying a banner that bore the arms of a minor house that had served the Shadowmere crown centuries ago. A lone wolf from the Canadian wilderness, his eyes wide with wonder as he beheld the castle he had seen only in dreams passed down through his bloodline. Urban werewolves who had hidden their nature for so long they had almost forgotten it existed, drawn by something deeper than conscious thought to this place of restoration. "My queen," the Highland Alpha said as he approached the castle steps, his pack flanking him in perfect formation. "We felt the awakening. After 300 years in exile, we have come home." Lyra felt tears streaming down her face as she looked upon these faces, her people, the scattered children of the moon finally returning to their ancestral gathering place. Through the mystical network established by the ritual, she could sense thousands more making their way toward Shadowmere from every corner of the globe. "Welcome home," she replied, her voice carrying across the grounds with supernatural clarity. "All of you, the age of hiding is over. The time of unity has begun." But even as joy filled her heart, Lyra was acutely aware of the challenges that lay ahead. Uniting the 7 great houses had been only the first step. Now they had to integrate thousands of werewolves who had been living separate lives, forge new alliances with other supernatural communities, and navigate the complex politics of a world where magic was no longer hidden. "The vampire courts have already sent emissaries," Arya reported, her prophetic gift showing her shadowy figures moving through the night toward the castle. "They're curious about what happened here. Some are hopeful, others are concerned about the shift in the supernatural balance of power." "Let them come," Marcus said, his solar energy blazing brighter as his confidence grew. "We're not seeking conflict, but we won't hide from our responsibilities either. The werewolf nation has a duty to protect the natural world, and we've been shirking that duty for too long." James nodded, his connection to the wild places showing him forests that were healing, animal populations that were stabilizing, ley lines that were humming with renewed vitality. "The earth itself is responding to our unity. The natural balance that was disrupted when the houses scattered is already beginning to restore itself." Sophie's enhanced senses were picking up the emotional resonances of the arriving werewolves, joy, relief, but also fear and uncertainty. "They're overwhelmed," she observed. "Many of them have been alone for so long, they've forgotten how to be part of a pack, let alone a dynasty." "That's why we need to be patient," Lyra said, drawing on wisdom that seemed to come from the collective memory of every Shadowmere queen who had come before her. "Unity isn't just about magical rituals and mystical bonds. It's about building trust, one relationship at a time." Elder Morgana's spirit materialized beside them, her ghostly form more solid and vibrant than it had been since her death. "The barriers between the realms have thinned," she explained. "The Moonheart ritual didn't just unite the living, it reconnected us with the ancestral spirits who have been waiting to guide you." Indeed, as Lyra looked around the castle grounds, she could see them, translucent figures who bore the bearing and regalia of werewolf nobility from ages past. Queen Seraphina stood among them, her expression radiant with pride and joy. "My daughter's daughter," Seraphina said, approaching with regal grace. You have done what I could not, restored the dynasty not through conquest or political maneuvering, but through love and sacrifice. The bloodline legacy is secure. But the real test is yet to come. Another spirit added, an ancient king whose crown bore symbols that predated even the Shadowmere dynasty. Unity achieved is only the beginning. Unity maintained requires constant vigilance, endless patience, and the wisdom to evolve with changing times. Lyra nodded, understanding the weight of what lay ahead. The werewolf nation would need new laws, new traditions, new ways of interacting with a modern world that was very different from the one their ancestors had known. They would need to establish diplomatic relations with other supernatural groups, find ways to protect the natural world without triggering conflicts with human authorities, and somehow manage the logistics of governing a global population that had been scattered for centuries. We'll need a council, she realized, looking at her 6 companions who had become so much more than allies. Representatives from every major region, every significant bloodline. And we'll need to establish safe havens, places where our people can gather without fear of exposure or persecution. The old network of sacred groves can be restored, James suggested, his druidic instincts showing him locations across the globe where the boundaries between worlds were thin. Many of them still exist, just hidden under layers of modern development and protective enchantments. And we'll need schools, Elena added, her practical nature focusing on immediate concerns. Most of our people have been raised in ignorance of their heritage. They'll need to learn the old ways, the proper forms of etiquette for dealing with other supernatural groups, the traditions that bind our communities together. The vampires won't be our only challenge, Arya warned, her gift showing her glimpses of other supernatural powers taking notice of the werewolves' sudden unity. The Fae court see this as an opportunity to renegotiate old treaties. The human occult societies are mobilizing, some to offer alliance, others to investigate what they see as a potential threat. Let them come, Kieran said, his guardian instincts expanded now to encompass not just Lyra but the entire werewolf nation. We have nothing to hide anymore. Our people deserve to live in the light, to be proud of what they are. As if summoned by his words, a new figure appeared at the edge of the castle grounds, not a werewolf, but something else entirely. Tall and graceful with pointed ears and eyes like starlight, the Fae noble approached with the fluid movement of someone accustomed to walking between worlds. Your Majesty, the Fae said, offering a bow that was respectful but not subservient. I am Lord Silvermoon of the Autumn Court. My queen sends her congratulations on your restoration and an invitation to discuss the resumption of the ancient accords between our peoples. More figures followed, vampire emissaries with their pale beauty and ancient eyes, human mystics whose auras showed decades of magical training, even a few beings that Lyra couldn't immediately identify but whose presence felt both powerful and benevolent. The supernatural world is awakening, Sophie murmured, her empathic abilities picking up the complex mix of emotions from the assembled delegations. For the first time in centuries, there's real hope for cooperation instead of just suspicious coexistence. Lyra felt the weight of destiny settling on her shoulders, but this time it didn't feel crushing. Instead, it felt like purpose, the culmination of everything she had been born to become. She was no longer just a lost young woman trying to understand her heritage. She was the last daughter of Shadowmere, the queen who would guide her people into a new age. But more than that, she was part of something larger, a network of souls connected by bonds stronger than blood, deeper than magic. The 7 great houses were united again, but they were also evolved, transformed by their shared experience into something their ancestors could never have imagined. Welcome, all of you, Lyra said, her voice carrying to every corner of the castle grounds and beyond, amplified by the mystical bonds that now connected every werewolf on Earth. Welcome to the dawn of a new age. An age where the children of the moon no longer hide in shadows, where the guardians of nature take their rightful place in the world, where unity triumphs over division and love conquers fear. The crowd erupted in howls of joy and celebration, not just from the werewolves, but from many of the other supernatural delegates as well. For the first time in centuries, The various factions of the hidden world were gathering not in conflict or suspicion, but in hope. The sun rose fully over Shadowmere Castle, its light revealing a scene that would have been impossible just days before. Dozens of supernatural species mingling peacefully on the grounds where the Werewolf dynasty had been restored. It was a glimpse of what the world could become when beings chose cooperation over competition, unity over isolation. But even as she celebrated this moment of triumph, Lyra knew that the real work was just beginning. Building a united werewolf nation, maintaining diplomatic relations with other supernatural groups, protecting both the natural world and their own people in an increasingly complex modern era. These challenges would test everything they had learned about love, sacrifice, and unity. Yet for the first time since discovering her heritage, Lyra felt truly ready for whatever lay ahead. She wasn't facing these challenges alone. She had her 6 bonded companions, the support of her reawakened people, and allies among the supernatural community who shared her vision of a better world. The Shadowmere dynasty had risen from the ashes, but it was no longer just about royal bloodlines and ancient crowns. It was about something far more precious and powerful, the proof that even in the darkest times, love could light the way home. Chapter 11. 3 weeks had passed since the Moon Heart ritual, and Shadowmere Castle had transformed from ancient ruins into a thriving center of supernatural diplomacy. The great hall that had once echoed with emptiness now buzzed with constant activity, werewolf pack leaders consulting with the newly established Council of Seven, vampire emissaries negotiating trade agreements for rare magical components, Fae nobles discussing territorial boundaries that hadn't been relevant for centuries. But tonight, the castle grounds were being prepared for something far more personal than politics. Tonight, under the light of a full moon that seemed to shine with particular brightness, Queen Lyra Shadowmere and Guardian Kirin Stormwolf would be formally bonded in the ancient ceremony that would seal not just their love, but the mystical connection that would anchor the new dynasty for generations to come. "I can't believe how nervous I am," Lyra confessed to Elena as her friend helped her into the ceremonial gown that had been worn by Shadowmere queens for 1,000 years. The dress itself was a work of art, midnight blue silk that seemed to contain actual starlight, embroidered with silver thread that formed the constellations visible on the night the first werewolf queen had been crowned. "Nervous is normal," Elena replied with a smile, her healer's instincts picking up on Lyra's elevated heart rate and the way her hands trembled slightly. "You're about to make a commitment that will literally bind your soul to another person's for eternity. I'd be worried if you weren't nervous." Sophie entered the chamber carrying a circlet of silver and moonstone, not the crown of starlight, which was reserved for formal state occasions, but the bonding crown, designed specifically for royal wedding ceremonies. "The guests are assembling," she reported, her enhanced senses picking up the emotional resonances from hundreds of beings gathering in the castle's restored gardens. "I've never felt such a concentration of joy and hope in one place." Through the window, Lyra could see the preparations below. The sacred grove where she and Kirin had first touched the power of their bloodlines had been expanded and enhanced, with crystalline formations that amplified magical energy arranged in perfect geometric patterns. Paths of white roses, a flower that bloomed year-round in the presence of true love, led from the castle to the ceremonial platform where Elder Morgana's spirit waited to officiate. "The other houses' representatives are taking their positions," Arya announced, her prophetic gift showing her glimpses of the ceremony to come. "Marcus has the solar blessing prepared, James has communion with every forest spirit within 50 miles, and the ancestral spirits are practically vibrating with excitement." Indeed, the ghostly figures of past Shadowmere queens were more visible tonight than they had been since the ritual. Queen Seraphina stood at the head of the ethereal procession, her form so solid she could almost pass for living. The joy radiating from the ancestral spirits was palpable. After 3 centuries of waiting, they would finally witness the formal establishment of the dynasty's continuation. "And Kirin?" Lyra asked, trying to keep her voice casual even as her heart raced at the thought of her soon-to-be mate. Pacing in the armory like a caged wolf, Elena said with a laugh. Marcus had to physically restrain him from coming to check on you for the third time in an hour. For someone who's lived for over 3 centuries, he's remarkably anxious about getting married. The observation made Lyra smile despite her nerves. In the weeks since the moon heart ritual, she and Kieran had grown even closer, their bond deepening as they worked together to establish the new governmental structures their people needed. But tonight would make their connection official in ways that transcended even the mystical links they had already forged. "It's time," Sophie said softly, her empathic abilities picking up the shift in energy from the assembled guests. "The moon has reached the proper position." Lyra took a deep breath, drawing on the strength that had carried her through trials that would have broken lesser souls. 3 months ago, she had been a confused young woman living a mundane life, unaware of her heritage or destiny. Now she was about to be bonded to the love of her life in a ceremony that would be witnessed by representatives from every major supernatural faction on Earth. The procession began with the ancestral spirits, their ethereal forms gliding silently through the moonlit gardens. The sight of them, dozens of former queens and their bonded mates, served as a reminder that this ceremony was about more than just personal happiness. It was about continuity, about the unbroken chain of love and sacrifice that had preserved the Shadowmere bloodline through centuries of exile and persecution. Next came the representatives of the 7 great houses, each bearing the ceremonial regalia of their bloodlines. Elena carried the healing chalice of House Ironheart, its silver surface gleaming with an inner light that promised to mend any wounds that might threaten the royal marriage. Marcus bore the solar crown of House Sunspear, its golden rays symbolizing the endless nature of true love. James carried the living staff of House Thornwick, carved from a tree that had been growing when the first werewolves walked the earth. Arya held the prophecy stone of House Nightwhisper, its dark surface swirling with visions of the future generations that would spring from this union. Sophie carried the memory vial of House Mistvale, containing scents that would preserve this moment for eternity. And representing his own house, though he waited at the altar, Kieran would bear the guardian sword of House Stormwolf, the blade that had defended the royal bloodline for a millennium. Finally, it was Lyra's turn. She stepped out of the castle's main entrance, the bonding crown on her brow and the ancient gown flowing around her like liquid starlight. The assembled guests, hundreds of werewolves, dozens of supernatural dignitaries, and even a few human allies who had proven themselves trustworthy, fell silent as she appeared. But Lyra had eyes only for Kieran, who stood waiting at the ceremonial platform with an expression of such love and devotion that it took her breath away. He wore the formal regalia of a guardian, midnight black leather decorated with silver emblems, a cloak that seemed to be cut from the night sky itself, and the ancient sword at his side that had once belonged to the first Stormwolf to serve the crown. As she walked down the rose-petal path, Lyra felt the weight of history in every step. This same ceremony had been performed dozens of times over the centuries, but each time it had been a celebration not just of love, but of hope for the future. Tonight, that hope felt more tangible than ever. "Dearly beloved," Elder Morgana began, her ghostly voice somehow carrying to every corner of the gathered assembly, "we are gathered under the light of the full moon to witness the bonding of souls, the joining of bloodlines, and the establishment of a union that will anchor the restored dynasty for generations to come." The ceremony itself was ancient beyond measure, its words passed down through oral tradition since the dawn of werewolf civilization. But as Lyra and Kieran spoke their vows, promises that went far beyond the typical marriage ceremony to encompass mystical bonds that would transcend even death, the words felt as fresh and meaningful as if they were being spoken for the first time. "Do you, Lyra of House Shadowmere, last daughter of the royal line, accept the guardian's oath that binds not just life to life, but soul to soul, destiny to destiny?" "I do," Lyra replied, her voice ringing with absolute certainty. "I accept Kieran as my mate, my partner, my other half. I pledge to share not just my love, but my power, my purpose, and my very essence for as long as the moon shines and the stars will overhead." "And do you, Kieran of House Stormwolf, guardian of the royal bloodline, accept the queen's heart that transforms duty to love, service to partnership? I do, Kieran answered, his golden eyes never leaving Lyra's face. I pledge not just my protection, but my heart, my soul, my eternal devotion. I choose love over duty, partnership over service, unity over solitude. The moment their vows were complete, power erupted between them. Not the desperate energy of the moon heart ritual, but something warm and joyous, and infinitely sustainable. Silver and gold light danced around them, visible to every eye present, as their souls touched and merged and separated again, forever changed by the contact. Charts, but in a good way. Whatever genetic changes have occurred in the royal bloodline since the moon heart ritual, they're definitely being passed on to the next generation. Changes? Kieran asked, though he had suspected something like this was happening. His own abilities had continued to evolve over the past year, growing stronger and more refined than they had been even during his centuries as a guardian. All of you are different now, Elena explained, pulling up a chair to join their impromptu conference. The 7 who participated in the ritual have abilities that go far beyond what any previous generation of werewolves possessed. And it's not just raw power, it's integration. You can access aspects of magic that used to require years of specialized training. As if to demonstrate her point, Lyra gestured toward the window, and the moonlight streaming through the glass began to form shapes in the air, not just illumination, but solid constructs of crystallized lunar energy that danced and played like living creatures. The moon goddess told Seraphina that love would awaken what slumbered, Lyra mused, watching the light creatures perform an elaborate aerial ballet. I don't think even she realized how literally true that would be. The other houses are reporting similar phenomena, Elena continued. Marcus's solar manipulation has evolved to the point where he can actually communicate with star spirits. James has become so connected to the natural world that he can sense environmental changes on the other side of the planet. Aria's prophetic abilities have expanded beyond personal visions to encompass entire timelines of possibility. And Sophie? Kieran asked, genuinely curious about the empathic perfumer who had become one of their most valuable diplomatic assets. Sophie can now literally create emotional harmony, Elena replied with a touch of awe in her voice. She attended a peace negotiation between 2 vampire covens last week and somehow managed to synthesize a scent that made it impossible for them to maintain their hostility toward each other. They signed a mutual defense pact within an hour. The implications were staggering. If the 7 bonded houses were continuing to evolve, developing abilities that transcended anything their ancestors had possessed, what did that mean for the future of supernatural society as a whole? We're not just restoring the old dynasty, Lyra realized, the truth hitting her with the force of revelation. We're creating something entirely new, something that's never existed before. Before anyone could respond, a commotion from the castle courtyard drew their attention to the window. In the moonlit space below, a gathering was forming, but not the usual diplomatic assemblies or pact councils that had become routine over the past year. This was something far more significant. Supernatural beings from every major faction were arriving in unprecedented numbers. Vampire princes who rarely left their ancient strongholds, fey nobles from both the Seelie and Unseelie courts, human mystics from secret societies that supposedly didn't acknowledge each other's existence, and creatures that Lyra couldn't even identify, but whose power was unmistakable. What's happening? She asked, her maternal instincts making her hold baby Seraphina a little closer. I think, Kieran said slowly, his enhanced senses picking up magical resonances that seemed to come from everywhere at once. We're about to find out what the next phase of the prophecy entails. Elder Morgana's spirit materialized in the nursery with unusual urgency, her ghostly form more solid than it had been since the night of the moon heart ritual. My queen, she said, her ancient voice carrying an edge of excitement and concern, you need to come to the great hall immediately. The moon goddess herself is manifesting. She has announcements to make. The great hall of Shadowmere Castle had been expanded twice over the past year to accommodate the increasing number of diplomatic functions, but even so, it was packed beyond capacity. Representatives from every supernatural faction on Earth stood shoulder to shoulder, their usual territorial instincts apparently suspended in the face of whatever was about to occur. At the center of the hall, where the throne of Shadowmere had been restored to its ancient glory, a pillar of silver light stretched from floor to ceiling. Within that light, a figure was taking shape, tall, graceful, with hair like spun starlight and eyes that held the wisdom of eons. The moon goddess herself, appearing in physical form for the first time in over a millennium. "My children," she said, her voice resonating not just through the hall but through the souls of every being present, "you have done well. The experiment I began so long ago has succeeded beyond my greatest hopes." "Experiment?" Lyra asked, stepping forward with Kieran at her side and their daughter in her arms. Around them, the other 5 members of the 7 took their positions, creating a formation that felt both natural and deeply significant. The separation of the supernatural races was never meant to be permanent, the goddess explained, her divine presence making the very air shimmer with possibilities. It was a test, to see if beings capable of transcending their individual natures could learn to choose unity over division, love over fear, cooperation over competition. She gestured toward the assembled crowd, her expression radiant with approval. "Look around you. Vampires and werewolves standing as allies rather than enemies. Fae courts that have put aside their ancient grudges to work toward common goals. Human mystics sharing knowledge with beings they once hunted. This is what I dreamed of when I first blessed the supernatural races with consciousness." The last daughter of Shadowmere had become the first queen of a unified supernatural world. And this was only the beginning of the legends that would be written in the starlight of centuries yet to come. Princess Seraphina Shadowmere Stormwolf stood on the balcony of the newly constructed Harmony Tower, watching as representatives from 7 different supernatural species worked together to plant the first trees in what would become the Global Preserve, a sanctuary where all magical creatures could coexist in peace. At 20 years old, she possessed abilities that still amazed even her parents. She could shift not just into wolf form, but into any supernatural shape she chose. She could heal with the touch of a vampire, prophesy with the clarity of the Fae, and work magic with the focused will that humans had perfected over millennia. But more than her abilities, it was her perspective that made her truly remarkable. She had never known a world where supernatural beings were enemies. To her, cooperation wasn't a hard-won achievement. It was simply the natural order of things. "Ready for your first diplomatic mission?" her mother asked, joining her on the balcony. Queen Lyra looked exactly as she had 20 years before, the mystical bonds of her bonding having slowed her aging to nearly nothing. "Ready," Seraphina replied, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had been raised to bridge worlds. "The young ones on Jupiter Station are eager to meet their Earth cousins." Because that was the truly magnificent thing. The unity achieved on Earth had attracted the attention of supernatural beings throughout the galaxy. The next phase of the prophecy was already beginning, and Princess Seraphina would be the one to lead it. The dynasty that had once ruled a single species on a single world was about to become something far greater, the foundation for a cosmic community where love, unity, and hope would light the way among the stars themselves. Some legacies truly do sleep for centuries, waiting for love to awaken them. But once awakened, they can grow beyond anyone's wildest dreams. The end.